Welcome back after a week off. Declan's gone missing somewhere on Earth. So it's just three of us tonight, George, Max, and Ben. We're talking about the new Bert Kreischer movie, The Machine, as Ben said before we started recording. So
I think this is
this
his first
movie,
movie too, right?
this is his first
Actual movie.
it's not, he's done obviously stand-up specials, which are close
Yeah.
to feature length. But
But that's
yeah,
not a movie. That's just a taped special.
what'd you guys think?
Um, you know, funny enough, in a movie called The Machine, my favorite character was just Mark Hamill. Um, the idea is kind of fun, but I feel like the execution was really lacking. But there's also something that gets taken away when you really like obviously The Machine got famous for this story. Part of the reason he got famous is there's a air of believability. I don't know whether it's true or not. I think he said it's true, but the point is that in this movie that the disbelief is just off the rails. You're no longer like believing the
Yeah.
story anymore, and there's just a bunch of like dumb jokes and stuff. It just really didn't feel like
I
very
mean,
enjoyable.
there are plenty of stand-up bits from a number of different comedians I would love to see adapted into a film.
Hmm.
That story from Bert Kreischer is not necessarily one I would have expected to be made into a film. Uh,
Yeah, I
and
think
and
it's
I,
weird
I
with
agree
that.
with you. I agree
It's
with you
like
on the execution. It was not my favorite.
I think it's weird with like we've seen some, pseudo like fictional versions of people like Nick Cage and Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent. But it fit with the story. I felt like a lot of the stuff was just unnecessary
I feel
because
like, and Max and I, we talked about this earlier, Ben, but the comparison is there to the unbearable weight of massive talent, which I'm still mad at you for taking that first overall in the 50th episode draft of movies that we did. Um, but yeah, I think that's the new standard for celebrities playing fictional versions of themselves in movies.
yeah, it's a
Um,
niche genre for sure.
yeah, for sure. But I think what we got from that movie was an original story
Hmm.
that the creative team um, led by Tom Gormican, the director, could sort of create around the persona of Nicolas Cage. Bert Kreischer, he's funny. He takes his shirt off. He's got this story about getting involved with the Russian mob when he was in his, early 20s.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a movie. And if it is, I don't know if, you know, you could
I think
either do the movie that we got or you could do a movie about Bert Kreischer in his 20s getting involved with the Russian mob. I don't
yeah,
think
I think if you
tying the
actually
two
tried
together.
to if you try to do a movie of the actual story and not try to add on like whatever else, that could probably work. But I feel like the enjoyment of that story is the air of believability that like, oh, this could have happened. Like this guy is the machine. Um, but with the movie, it's like a ridiculous, bad comedy. It doesn't feel very unique to him, you know. It feels like they took his backstory, but whatever we get in the film is very um cliche, I guess, to a certain extent. Just a bunch of jokes. I just don't get the story, like the way that, I'm not a big fan of Bert Kreischer, but I like that story. When I first saw it, I thought that was great. But I
It's
just didn't
great
connect to the movie at all. Like,
as a stand-up bit. it is great.
Yeah.
You know, the original clip that went viral however many years ago was just such a fun watch, and he tells the story really, really well
Yeah.
when he's on stage talking to an audience. There's no audience in this film. It's very much trying to be an action comedy with that as its source material.
Yeah.
You sort of get like, oh, this is the aftermath of what happened, but then we've got so many flashbacks to, you know, Jimmy Tatro as young Bert Kreischer, and it doesn't all fit together the way you would want like a puzzle to have all the pieces fit together.
No, it's like they took every run-of-the-mill like action comedy and just added on the prequel of Bert's story as the machine.
Yeah, it's
That's what I meant by
very,
like it feels very cliche. It doesn't feel original. And you
it's
actually touched on
formulaic.
it. Yeah, formulaic. That's the word I was looking for. Um, but you actually touched on something that I think is important, which is for a lot of these stand-up bits, especially when you're telling a story. I mean, one of my favorites is Eddie Izzard. And the way that he tells a story, like you can do it over, 10, 15 minutes. It's the way that they tell it, not just the story itself. But you lose the delivery when you turn it into a movie. It's no longer a stand-up like story being delivered. And I think that's like delivery is one of the most important things to comedy. That's what makes somebody good at stand-up. To take that away is like taking away half the story. Um, and I also thought like I love Mark Hamill, but it is a little it's like just seeing the Joker sort of. I mean, he's like a sort of
It's
crazy to an
it's not
extent.
even seeing the Joker, it's seeing Mark Hamill
It's,
basically as himself.
yeah, it's just Mark Hamill, but he's doing a bunch of like the Joker like voices and stuff during it.
Was he doing a different voice from his own? Because at the beginning I thought he was, and then
No,
towards
no, but
the
when
end,
he
it just
says a few
felt like his
things, like
voice.
no, no, he's doing most of it, but like he'll do, a few lines like he's the motherfucking machine. It just sounds like the Joker.
Yeah.
Uh,
Even like especially even the scenes when he was on drugs towards the end of the
yeah,
movie, I
yeah,
was like, oh my God.
yeah. It's like watching. I don't know. It was a little too much. I liked him the most, but I think the movie was just not thought out enough.
And when you talk about the movie not being thought out enough, I want to talk about the dialogue because there are stretches, like there are some funny moments, like when Kreischer really gets to be himself and not the character of Bert Kreischer.
Hmm.
That's where he really soars in this movie.
Yeah,
And then there are moments, and the one that sticks out to me is Irina's uh big climactic line after she shoots and kills her father, which is, "Did I do that?" And like, yeah, they were talking about Family Matters and Steve Urkel earlier in the movie, but this is your big cathartic moment that your entire life has been building for, or not your entire life, but you talked about Bert Kreischer talked about her origin story, with the watch and getting into this, her family getting into this life of crime, organized crime. And your big cathartic moment of revenge against your father and your family, you're going to do a one liner that comes from Family Matters. I mean,
like
that there were moments of really bad dialogue in the film, but that takes the cake. That was just so,
That was real
it
bad.
took me
what
out
I
of the
was
movie.
I was really feeling during this movie is like it's slightly better writing, but pretty much like home team, like really bad Adam Sandler jokes. Like just I I didn't find it funny at all. Like there are a few funny moments, sort of, where I was enjoying it. Again, mostly just like around Mark Hamill, but for the most part, it's just not enjoyable.
There have been some action comedies this year that are less than good, we'll say,
Hmm.
um, that we haven't talked about on the pod. Uh, Die Hard with Kevin
Yep.
Hart and John Travolta. Ghosted with Ana de Armas and Chris Evans.
Oh,
These are
oh,
action comedies, and I will lump in The Machine with those two movies and say that they start out really poorly. All three films have a really bad first act. The second act, it becomes super generic, super formulaic, super cliche action comedy. All three have basically the same ending. The main character, the hero, sort of steps up and finds his place in the story by being, an action hero while cracking jokes. All three were letdowns.
Yeah. And
I didn't expect the world from this movie, but it just fell flat.
to be honest, I think like I have no problem with a formulaic plot. Obviously, people have often talked about westerns having like six different plots or whatever. But I think the thing that makes a movie is the writing, the creativeness to it. And I was sad that the writing was so poor for, a movie about a comedian.
I think if Kreischer had written the movie, it would have been better.
Yeah. I just don't think like
He was a
I think
producer and he was an actor
yeah,
and he did nothing else creatively.
I think it's tough when you're taking this. I mean, even if he was a writer, like he's a stand-up comedian, those it doesn't always translate. To be a good comedy writer of movies and to be a good stand-up comic. There's plenty of people who were great at stand-up comic and found that they were really good at writing, TV shows and movies and things. Larry David's one of them. Like, funny stand-up comic, but really he shines in the writing department. Or even, the acting for Curb and stuff. But you can't do everything. And I haven't, this is Bert's first actual movie. Never really done anything like an actual movie or TV show or whatever. I think it was an awful lot to take his most original bit and have someone else write a story around it. I think that's probably why it ended up the way it did. But I'm not even sure if Bert wrote it that it would be like a good movie. The jokes may be funnier, but you know, who knows whether he would be able to pull it off as a movie.
Max, what are your thoughts?
yeah. I mean, I think if he had written it, we may have gotten a different delivery of the actual story when they were on the train. I think that it it made sense for it to be more dramatic than funny,
Yeah,
sort of like, and if it was him cracking jokes the whole time, I don't think it would have carried enough weight in the moment. And I'm glad that they didn't devolve into making stupid. I mean, they could have, obviously, they were capable of it when they put in the Urkel line at the end, like that George mentioned. Like we know what this was. We know that there were opportunities for this movie to be worse. I went in with really low expectations. I still didn't come out liking it, but for me it did get progressively marginally better across the course of the film. I think it maybe stopped trying as hard consistently. It felt like it was forcing in the first act.
yeah.
Um, yeah,
I
didn't
think
really enjoy
Like,
it, but
I just
what
didn't
that's
laugh.
okay.
Like, it's really bad for an action comedy to not make me laugh.
yeah, that's always disappointing. And I think one thing that could have improved this movie, and it's a thought that I had literally in the first minute of screen time in the film, when you see Irina's father watching Bert Kreischer deliver his, you know, iconic story through stand-up. What if this movie, and hear me out here, what if this movie used Bert Kreischer's bit as a framing device? And we saw the flashbacks, and that was the movie. You see Jimmy Tatro as young Bert Kreischer going through the story of the machine using the stand-up set as your framing device.
That's what I was
I
thinking
think
too.
it could be good. I think my big concern, and this is be concern for any stand-up bit being turned into a movie. The whole idea behind the machine is when you're listening to the story, you know nobody gets hurt, you know like nothing bad happens, you know, it's supposed to be a joke. And delivery is what keeps you, that's a suspense right there, is how he delivers it. But in a movie, you have to have some arcs for the character, and all of a sudden you're going to have to create a more complete character, um, give more depth around things, and then it takes away from the joke. I fundamentally think the idea is interesting, but I don't think it's very easy or even possible to execute because the whole setup for jokes is that those pieces of like drama and stuff are not going to cut through. Where in a movie, they are sort of happening at the same time. You know, it's a composite.
Well, that's where all the other characters really come into the film. His father, Albert, Mark Hamill, um, his wife and daughters, particularly his older daughter, Igor, the primary Igor, not the, you know, joke Igor that shows up on the train that isn't the real Igor. And oh my God, everyone in Russia is named Igor. Um, we sort of, you know, see the creative team try to give Bert an arc, like you said, Ben, through his emotional ties to these other characters. Obviously, there's an attempt at the theme of redemption. There's an attempt at the idea of reconnection with a parent, with a spouse, with a child. You know, the idea of legacy with, and I'm grasping at straws here, trying to come up with lessons and morals and themes. You know, legacy with Irina and her family, and you know, it's a sort of hodgepodge
Yeah,
of what can we have these characters do for an hour and 52 minutes.
but I think that like
When
really
you've
under
got a when you've got a stand-up bit that, you know, and correct me if I'm wrong, but as I remember it, the story of the machine is no more than like 10 minutes, right? It's
yeah, it
short.
tells it in like 10 minutes, and it's
So
sort of it's like a vacate or a school trip, right?
yeah. So
Um,
you're gonna stretch this out probably about 20 minutes longer than it needed to be if you were going to make a movie. Make it 90 minutes, please. We don't need almost 2 hours of this. It's
yeah,
like it's like when Morbius was 2 hours. We didn't need that. It's like Home Team being almost 2 hours. We didn't need that.
Home Team
yeah.
was almost 2 hours.
Well,
What the hell?
those movies didn't even be made in the first place. So,
Blonde was almost 3 hours and we sat through it.
oh God,
Do you say Dune?
I'm not saying that the machine is on that bottom tier of movies we've done on the pod.
I think the problem is that like it's
It's
not that it's
close.
too long; it's that the joke is not long enough to make a movie. It's barely long enough to make a
Exactly.
TV episode. You know,
Exactly.
it's the fundamental thing, like you were saying, with like all these relationships and stuff. Obviously, you have to stuff it with something. You can't have one note just comedy the entire time. Like even, I mean, my favorite comedy movie is probably Airplane. That has a lot of great jokes, and the best thing about it is most of
Leslie
them,
Nielsen.
huh?
The best thing about it is Leslie Nielsen.
Well, no. The best thing about it is that half of the lines from that movie, in fact, I think maybe a majority of them, are taken straight from other movies that are playing it straight. So the entire joke is making fun of those movies. And to do it,
True.
they just do the same thing and change, like I said before, the delivery, like the timing of things. Writing is important, but you are missing a fundamental thing when you play it like just a straight action comedy. Um, there's a level of character to stand-up comedy. You know, you really have to enjoy the person. You have to connect with the audience. You're just cutting out so much by turning it into this cliche, like you said, formulaic movie. And all of that like emotional ties undercut to just joke, which is like he's stealing from his classmates and stuff. You don't want to deal with morality and stuff. All of a sudden, it's ruining the joke, you
Yeah,
know? You
are we
can't keep that
suddenly
in.
supposed to think, oh, Bert's a bad guy?
Yeah, exactly.
It's I 100% agree with you that it's sort of shoehorned in there where it didn't need to be. So let's talk about one of the positives of the movie beyond his Joker voice. Mark Hamill. Uh, Mark Hamill has had quite the career. I don't know if I necessarily expected him to be in a movie like this,
I did not, but
but
Mhm.
it was enjoyable.
he's here and he's second billed behind Bert Kreischer. And you can just tell, at least from my perspective, he knows it's not a good movie, but he's going to make the most of it.
I think he really enjoys taking projects where he can have fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I mean, he was on a bunch of like CW shows and stuff. He shows up in random cameos. He doesn't need money anymore, so he can do whatever he wants. Um,
Must be nice.
yeah, so I feel like this probably took him not very long to film, and it was probably fun. So I completely understand him being in it. And he's probably one of the best moments. I think the only thing is just everyone just doesn't seem to fit together. Him and Bert work well together. They have pretty good
Mhm.
chemistry.
Yeah, I would say so.
But like you
The-
said, it is the drawback is you sort of just seeing Mark Hamill just have fun on screen.
which is fun to watch. You
Yeah,
know, he's an absolute delight. I love Mark Hamill. I love watching him in basically everything I've seen him in.
but you do lose the illusion of there's no way that dude is his father. It's like,
Especially in the sequences with Jimmy Tatro.
yeah,
And, that whole idea gets kind of thrown to the wind when you get the drugged out sequence in the woods where Bert is talking to his younger self. It just gets really blurred and clunky, and even early on when we're first introduced to the dynamic that, oh, Jimmy Tatro is a young Bert Kreischer, that chemistry that we see with Mark Hamill and the older Bert Kreischer throughout the film, it's not at all there with Jimmy Tatro.
you guys ever
The
write a
scene, the
paper?
scene by the lake or river or wherever when they're fishing, I
Hmm.
just felt uncomfortable watching that. Like, oh,
Yeah.
it's a scene in the movie. Yep, I'm watching it.
Well, I was thinking of you guys ever write a paper and it's like, all right, I definitely know what I'm going to write about. But you realize that your idea is only two sentences, and then you have to figure out the
Yeah.
rest of the paper. I feel
Been
like
there.
that's sort of what happened in this movie, which is it sounds like such a great idea. It's like, oh yeah, we can riff off this and this and this and this, and then you put it all together and it's like, wait a minute, I don't know what's happening. And then your teacher gives you comments like question mark, question mark,
Hawk.
what's this doing here? That's sort of my opinion of the creative process behind this movie, in my
Yeah,
opinion. They
and
had ideas, but they didn't know how to put them together.
that's sort of something that I'm kind of going through with the movie I'm writing right now. I'm in film school for another few weeks. Um, but my first feature that I wrote was a bunch of short films that I then put together with a framing device, and suddenly it was 97 pages. And that's, one way to write a feature.
Hmm.
Not the conventional way, but you take scenes, you order them, and you put them in sequence. The film I'm writing now is, I'm trying to write it in sequence, top to bottom, and I've got all these ideas. I know, how it starts. I know where I want it to end. But, as I'm writing, Ben, you're absolutely right. There are some big ideas that I have, and then they only take, page and a half. And it's like, this isn't a feature. This is a short, maybe. This
Yeah.
is, a mini series episode. but it's hard to write a movie. I'm slowly realizing, but what we see in The Machine is that dialed up to 11.
Especially when your source material is a 10-minute long
It's
stand-up,
so short
which is
compared.
like which is a very short story because he's telling, he's delivering it slowly, like, with pauses and stuff. If you tell it straight, it's probably like a 3-minute story.
Yeah, and you're not going to have beats in the movie where you can pause for laughter. This
Yeah,
is this isn't a Marvel movie where they're going to tell Andrew Garfield to hold for 5 seconds while the audience applauds,
yeah,
and then when you're watching it back later, you're saying, "All right, get on with the scene." This movie is just it's trying to make a mountain out of a molehill, and there's not much of a molehill to go off of.
yeah. I mean, again, I think it's just a problem with making any stand-up bit into something like this.
But the thing is, there are stand-up bits that could work as a feature film. None come to mind right now.
Well, I think the problem is that none of them are long enough. I mean, a stand-up special is 2 hours, right?
Not even.
Nobody nobody tells a joke that's 2 hours. Say all of a sudden you have to fill out things. The jokes are just too short normally.
I could understand a film being based on a stand-up bit.
Yeah. I mean, I
If
guess
there's a
if an idea is like really interesting and you can just straight up turn that into something. But I mean,
But
a
to
lot of
make the
the best,
movie out of the bit itself is a
yeah.
flawed plan.
I mean, it's like
It leads
we
to a
talked
flawed
about
movie.
movies. We talked about movies where people are themselves, like fictionalized versions of themselves. I think a great comparison is also a movie like Being John Malkovich. That takes the idea of John Malkovich. Nothing about his character, really. None of his movies too much. It's more about the idea of John Malkovich. You could do that. You could take something, but you have to give yourself more freedom than casting Bert and, like making it an actual extension of that story. You have to be willing to bend it a little bit, um,
And
and
if you're
turn
going
it.
to tell the story, tell the story. Don't tell the aftermath of the story.
Well, what I mean is like, I think it would be tough to even do it just as the story, but you can do like a fictionalized version. Tell the story, but don't say it's the machine. Like, take the idea of somebody, befriending a Russian mobster and getting into all this trouble, and then you can do whatever you want. You can add scenes, you can add whatever, but taking the story and the bit as itself, you're going to lose the authenticity.
I
Um,
just recently rewatched Tag from like 5 years ago.
mhm.
Uh, Great film, tons of fun, based on an article in the Wall Street Journal. And it takes the idea presented in the article and makes an original film,
Yeah.
or not an original film, but it writes a story adapting the idea without saying, all right, these are the exact people and these are some of their exact stories from playing tag competitively against each other for all these years.
And I think
We're going to
that's
use the
something that
idea, but we're not going to do the idea.
a lot of writers do that. I assume the reason that they really wanted to do this as the machine is because it's a viral video. I mean, he's a famous comedian. You don't want to lose that market, but you really do lose. It's not unique, it's nothing really. So yeah, I think you're right. I mean, you can adapt something. You just can't adapt things straight. You have to take the idea and create it yourself. But if you're not doing a lot of creative, um, part of the story, then it's not going to do well.
One positive I can take from this film is the first part of the sequence in Igor's village. And the character of Igor as a whole, because he's just so wholesome compared to Bert.
Hmm.
He is funny, and yet we get this sort of, not quite a foil to Bert, but he's someone who was in the mafia life and got out, and he made the best of his situation, and he's just a genuinely good guy. And Bert, for the first 2 acts of the movie, his character of Bert, not a good guy. He made mistakes when he was younger, but now, he's making things about himself in therapy. He's making things about himself at his daughter's birthday party. He's selfish. He's not he's a crappy guy. And what I love about Igor is that he gives Bert an opportunity to almost look in the mirror and see, you know, how life could be different, how life could be better. And I think if they had leaned into ideas more consistently like that, like we talk about all the different sort of lessons and morals and concepts that they tried to throw in there, if there was a more consistent tone to what may be considered an underlying message, then I think the film would have been stronger. If they, if we're taking the idea that this stand-up bit would become a film, there needed to be more consistency from the ground up,
Hmm.
using Igor as an example. But it really just, it never gets there. The movie about this story could have been good. This
Yeah.
movie,
Well, you know, I still wouldn't have wanted to see, just for the viewers at home, the other option was Little Mermaid.
which was good. It was fine.
I
It
know,
was much better than this.
but man,
just
I hate
real
giving
quick,
Disney money for that shit.
real quick, Ben. Max, give us a 2-minute review of The Little Mermaid.
Melissa McCarthy was fantastic as Ursula. Prince Eric, he's fine. Halle Bailey is actually surprisingly very good. I think she likely had to, you know, play around with sort of the mental blocks of taking on the role and knowing that she would get some backlash and preparing for it. And she obviously did, but I think she did really, really well. Overall, fine adaptation. It's nothing that's amazing, but when it comes to Disney remakes that no one asked for, it's up there with one of the better ones for sure.
Okay, but what about the fish? Did they scare you?
No, they look a lot better in the film than they do in the trailer.
Okay, all right.
Yeah,
Even
yeah, yeah.
Sebastian looked weird.
No, okay. So one thing I will say about the animation is that at certain times it does look very, very fake. But I actually think that it works in the movie's favor because one thing that the remake of The Lion King kind of got dinged for was that the animals looked too good, that
Yeah,
they looked like we can't be looking at a real
I don't
lion
believe
here,
that thing can
right?
speak.
Yeah, like I believe that Sebastian can speak. I believe that Flounder can speak. I believe that Scuttle can speak because
All
they
right.
look fake enough that I'm not like, that's a real bird. It shouldn't be talking. I'm like, okay, it looks real, but like I can tell that it's not actually there. So
Yeah.
I think that actually does end up working in its favor. Um, Kind of taking it down a couple of notches from the Lion King.
Well, maybe we should have done that. I don't know. But yeah,
Well,
I was final thoughts. I can't say I was expecting a lot, but I was
Yeah.
disappointed just to not see his like Bert come through very much in the comedy and the story. It was like him, but
it
it
was
wasn't
him
him speaking.
playing a character.
Yeah.
Like, you could have made that character not named Bert Kreischer with his background.
Yep.
Yep.
and it wouldn't have been any different.
Yeah.
And here you get Bert Kreischer, and he's trying to play himself, but he's also trying to play the character. And there are moments, like I said earlier, when he comes through and it's hilarious because he's hilarious, but those are few and far between. So this movie was, I don't know, a letdown. I wasn't expecting too much, but still it could have been more. I don't know if I would see it again. Maybe
Not
years
a
from
chance.
now,
I would
but
not. I would not.
Not a
Love Mark
chance.
Hamill, but no. Sorry.
no immediate interest in seeing it again anytime soon.
Yeah, I wouldn't choose to see it if it was on and it was the only thing I could find and it was at a good moment in the movie. Then sure, maybe
Yeah.
I'd sit with it for a couple minutes, but there's no way I'm looking for it.
Yeah, I'm not actively trying to see the whole thing top to bottom, no breaks again.
Nah, I don't care.
Yep.
So next week, Declan will be back with us. We will be going across the Spider-Verse. I'm already getting texts from my buddy JP saying, and I'm quoting here, also just saw Spider-Verse. It was perfect. Genuinely. Nothing wrong with it. There's no such thing as a perfect movie. Bullshit this was. So my hopes for Spider-Verse are sky high. I'm seeing it Sunday.
So excited.
Yeah, I've heard very good things.
So we will be back next week to talk about
Wait.
all of this. Miles Morales, Peter Parker, Gwen Stacy. Maybe Spider-Ham will be back. Mulaney was fun in the first one.
Spider-Man War.
Yes, Miguel O'Hara is in this movie.
That's the best.
That's 2099. That's not Spider-Man Noir.
No,
Nick Cage
Spider-Man
was
War is
Spider-Man
Nick
Noir.
Cage.
That was Nick Cage.
Yeah.
I should know. In the trivia episode, I brought up Spider-Verse, right? Or did someone
Yeah.
else? Was that me?
You did, I think.
I don't know. That trivia sequence was. I ran out of movies a lot faster than I thought I would.
Oh yeah, that's right. Because you were pulling out. So you
I mean-
forget that Cage does a bunch of like random horror movies and things that you guys don't watch, but I do.
You know what no one said for
Hey,
Nicolas
look,
Cage
Ben,
movies?
you and I went toe to toe, and I won't hear anything about it.
I had at least 10 more movies.
Nobody
Shut
said.
up.
Nobody said Renfield.
Yeah, I realized that afterwards.
I don't wait. I thought
got
it wasn't out yet, or is it out
No,
now?
it
Was it
It's
hasn't
out
been
by
out
the
for a few
time?
months.
It's actually out of
Oh,
it's out on
okay.
streaming.
Oh,
Shit, I'm gonna watch that. All right. This was a very interesting episode, just the three of us.
Yeah.
But we will see you next week for Spider-Verse. We're looking forward to that. We're looking forward to bringing Declan back.
Should be fun.
Yeah. The Machine is currently playing in theaters if you're interested in spending money to see this movie.
You could also just watch the stand-up on YouTube for free.
Watch the stand-up on YouTube for free. That's a better course of action. Good night.
yeah.
Good night.